Yeah. We have Dr. Torange Khonsari with us, and we'll speak today about the common sphere. Just a small reminder, thanks for our sponsors, being Common Stack, Givet, General Magic, and Giga. And on this note, Torange, I'm passing to you. Thanks for your session.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm really glad to be here. Thank you for having me. I kind of, usually I know exactly my audience. So this is a bit of a stab in the dark. So I think if I'm saying phrases that are a bit alien or concepts that you want to either question or want me to explore, you don't have to wait until the end, just kind of come in and ask. I'm going to share my screen in a minute. And I just before doing that, I actually am maybe a bit of an odd one in that I have always in my life had, or in my career, had been a bit of a technophobe. And about 3 years ago, but I've kind of been in the Commons for a very long time. And about 3 years ago, a colleague of mine who I've worked with for 20 years started to tell me about blockchain, and I became a bit obsessed and have been kind of trying to get my head around it. So it was only 3 years ago, you know, for a technophobe, it takes time. And so I've been kind of trying to think how the commons, the scaling up of the commons and the blockchain and DAOs and all this can actually start to look at systemic power shifts within the work I was doing. So without kind of rambling on too much, I share my screen. Can you also see this?
Yep.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so who I am. I trained as an architect, but kind of really didn't enjoy the commercial field of architecture. It just felt very top down, centralized, finance based, and developed my own company with 5 other colleagues called Public Works. And we were public artists, architects, and always embedding in citizens' power and bottom-up practices from the ground up. And the sphere of commons came to me about 10 years ago when we were invited to the European Parliament for the Commons Assembly in Brussels. To start to influence with the MEPs, members of European Parliament, policies. And so I kind of started to, and then there I saw so many organizations on the ground working on the commons that I really felt like, okay, this is a movement. There is something really interesting, and let's support this movement in a way. I kind of start with these 2 slides, and I'm sorry that it's so dense. I'll just summarize it. But when I was doing my research and doing my PhD at the university, they kept saying, oh, you have to do your ethics proposal, you know, that you're ethical in your research because you're working with people. And I found it really, really problematic. And I started to take them on slightly, saying, but the way you're talking about ethics is mainly a legal contract so that you don't get sued. It wasn't really about like really how I behave with people or how people behave with me. That was the other thing. I had a lot of kind of community members being very unethical towards me as a collaborator. So it has to be 2 ways. It can't just be one way, which is the justice-based model, where, you know, it's based on the individuals, you know, and you're right, the other person is wrong, or somebody is responsible for you. And I found that really awful within the commons. So I started to look at this ethics of care, which is highly contextual. And I know this is kind of This is the weird thing between the commons and technology of the blockchain, because the blockchain is so big and abstract and global, and the commons, actually, the way that they're being developed on the ground are so one-to-one and kind of personal and so on. So for me, the interesting thing is not to lose these kind of two models. But anyway, ethics of care was highly contextual, and really you have to understand the whole contextual situation. So it requires a lot of listening. It's not about purely individualistic pursuit. The other thing I'm really interested in the commons is the relationship between the individual and the collective, because everything which is collective vertically is also very problematic, because you can get autocracy, you know, through collective verticality, where, you know, there is an ideology and everybody has to agree to that. But what is that kind of much more nuanced relationship where the individual and the self can still be empowered or self-empowered, and then be a contributor to a collective? And there could be different collectives, you know, so that's what I find more interesting. It is a bit in opposition of the justice-based ethics, but actually I think, again, you need both. You know, we need a kind of larger universal kind of moralities that we kind of believe in and agree on. And then there's the more situated ones, which are much more distinct, which are kind of maybe culturally different, place-based, you know, and so on and so forth. But it is ultimately about being connected, and emotions play a part in it. And I always found it really difficult, because if I'm working on the ground and there's a lot of injustices and people feel really disempowered, I can't be detached and impartial to that. You know, that's just you kind of pretending there's a part of you that doesn't exist. So I think that's really important, because if you really come from the perspective of care, actually you won't do things that are wrong. You know, if, for example, what we've seen with FTX, you know, if really there was really care for everyone, you know, involved in that horrific, you know, with this nutter, then you know, you don't need these other ethical stuff about what is right and what is wrong. You know, that there would be other forms, and it's very new. We don't know how a policy of ethics exactly looks, or so we're all experimenting with it, right? And that's what's exciting. And added to that, and this is only the only literature on it is really in nursing at the moment, this relational ethics. But again, I find it really interesting in that where that actually you put the focus on the relationship, you don't put the focus on the people. And that, I think, is really interesting in the current context also with planet and the non-human, because if you put because the non-human right now, just like slaves or women in the past, were kind of objectified. You can own them, you know, it's like land, you know. And so when things become objects, that's when a lot of atrocities can happen, because they don't have a voice, right? So the interesting thing here becomes that if you put the focus on the care in the relationship, then you know, if the relationship is competitive, that's already a quite destructive relationship, right? Because you have winners and losers rather than cooperation. And so that I find also really kind of contemporary, especially if we're talking about a network society, which is all around relationships in a network, right? So then we can't really just talk about the nodes. That's quite an old-fashioned way of thinking about ethics. So there's kind of relational theory, which has been around since Aristotle, by the way. It's a really long kind of philosophy, comes really, I feel, now to its own, because we are now a network society and not an industrial society. But a lot of our justice-based ethics is still based on that industrial society model of right and wrong and the hierarchy being responsible for the little person and, you know, all of those things. So I kind of, you know, I think this is really interesting. And there was the talk with the network state and, you know, whatever, you know, to me, it's kind of, that's just a provocation. You know, I don't think it's a model particularly, but in a way, I think a lot of our political systems are also breaking and collapsing because it's based on an older societal system. And we are now this kind of system. We're a network society and they're just not designed to deal with this. So that, I mean, I do this, I think probably a lot of you know this already, but I do this talk also to local government, to third sector organizations, institutions and things like that. So it's a part of also my advocacy work in the UK. This is, if you don't know this book, I really highly recommend it. It's called Donut Economics by Kate Raworth. And yeah, I mean, it really changed my perspective, this book, as I was working on the Commons. And she has this 21st century priority list, which is like this, but it's just listed. It's not so colorful as in this diagram. And maybe just before talking about this, I'm going to just show you this one, because this is what we have now, where power is on the top. You know, everybody is trying to be as powerful as possible, Elon, you know, Mr. God. And then, you know, you have all these other instruments like the market and so on, or even, you know, SBF, you know, all these kind of people. And then you have the market as this instrument towards that. Then you have the economy. Then you have, you know, it's kind of, these are all like on the top. And then we kind of go, okay, fine, we'll deal with the planet then. And then, okay, fine, society, yeah, otherwise they'll rise up. And then, you know, the state, unfortunately, so clueless kind of in terms of, you know, why it's being distrusted. And then the commons, which is the sphere of us as people on the ground, the community. And the household is not even considered. So I'll go back to Kate. I don't know, this just looks like a much more balanced diagram to me, where incidentally and interestingly, right in the middle of it, you have the market, the commons, and the state not fighting for power, but actually collaboratively doing what they do best, without trying to co-opt one or the other into themselves. And I think if they actually do that, like Kate says, in a holistic way, we need all of them. Yeah, I really believe we do also need a kind of public governing system, whatever that, you know, whether networked or whatever form, because we've seen, you know, we can't have this deregulation. We've seen what's happened in the crypto market. But anyway, the household she talks about is where care is being offered in the UK. I think when I last looked in 2020, there was something like £1 trillion of the GDP was free labor, especially by women in the home. So we can't not consider it, you know, as a form. And then I suppose then this middle bit is the market, the commons, and the state become these institutional kind of spaces, however way you might want to look at it, decentralized or whatever, that actually allows us to kind of operate within those things. I mean, that's up for discussion. I'd love to hear what you all think. But again, I just want to say, I think by not having a commons sphere or sector or whatever you want to call it, then the other two systems are very powerful and constantly co-opt the citizens or the sphere of the community. So the sphere of the community, which is what excites me about this space, the blockchain space and there's the DAO and all this bottom-up organizing, is that it potentially can really strengthen this kind of sphere of the commons to become as powerful as the other two, to start to negotiate with it. And I think it's already doing it through DeFi and things like that. So I think they have to all have the same amount of power in order to be able to collaborate within their own system. So just, I mean, the market we know, I don't have to talk about, but the public is open to all. So the public it has no boundaries, it's open to all. But the commons are different, the way at least that I and Eleanor and, you know, we kind of talk about it. And that is because, not because I've invented it in any way, it's because there are two different definitions of common good. One is a communal common good, where what we all believe is a common good for us to access freely. And that one, the problem, kind of those of us who don't want to use that sense of it, is that it's been used by the most powerful to talk about public good. And then you start to kind of have this constant fight with the public good, and, you know, what's the difference between the public good and the common, and they get interchanged. And then the community, the bottom up, gets lost again, because it kind of goes into that sphere of the public. But the commons, they are like DAOs. They are kind of, they do have a boundary, but you have to design the boundary so that its access is not exclusive or not exclusively money orientated. But they are, you know, they have a cause, they have a community. It is about nurturing trust relationships, or whatever relationships that it says that it wants to do. But they are almost like a different scale, which is much more around communities. You know, there might be communities of interest or ambition or whatever they might be. But it's a very different logic. And that's why the state can't deal with this, because they're about open to all. So then, in a way, the commons become these kind of very distinct forms of organizing that need, as Ostrom says in her, just very basically in her 8 principles, they need rules. Without them, you're going to have the tragedy of the commons. And then one of her students, Eleanor Ostrom's student, Charlotte Hess, wrote this article called The New Commons, and you can get it for free, I think, as a PDF. Where she starts to map out all these other forms of commons. And the new commons are man-made commons. They're not the natural commons necessarily. Well, I think they're not the natural commons. The ones that are in gray are the ones I don't know much about at all. And the really orange ones are the ones I know, and the other ones are the ones I have been working on. But I think there is a lot of them to consider. And I do think that the blockchain and the DAO world and probably much more have a lot to play in that. Yeah, that's the European Commons Assembly that I was talking about. And so I think there is a really huge network on the ground of commons practitioners, but they're just not linking up with the tech right now. That a lot of them don't know it. A lot of them are worried about the energy issue and the climate issue and so on and so forth. Now, I'm going to just talk about 2 projects which are really on the ground, and hopefully, I don't know, we can talk about it, but hopefully some of those things also help us think about the commons in the digital virtual world. The way that we also work is that I don't start with a problem. I kind of, you know, we got invited, this particular project in London. As you know, it's an uber neoliberal city with land prices which you can't even imagine. And 40% or more of our public land has been sold off to private developers. So, you know, our common land, so spaces for us to common in is being being privatized. And So when this particular community came to me and said, oh, we want to create a community-led high street management so that we tell the local government how we want our high street to develop in East London. And could you help us? And I said, okay, I'll bring my students. We take over a piece of land, which was this kind of, which I negotiated with the landowner, where you see this kind of little structure. And I will just open up, and you know, education is not free in the UK. And I said, I'm just going to take my architecture classes and open it up to the community in this high street, and it's an open door architecture education. And so I started to run kind of my classes from there. And then I said to them, you can use this as a space to get the other community involved. And so over time, then different people came and said, could we run our sessions in there, and so on and so forth. And it started to become like a public living room as a common good in that space. And over time, I started to kind of read a lot more around this land issue. And you see the documents on the top. They're kind of these feasibility studies that you have to do for local government in order for them to kind of either give you more money or say something is feasible to be done. So I just recorded all the voices of the people from the ground, because usually you would come as an expert, right? Fly in from the top down, say what should happen. Maybe you do a bit of a community consultation tokenistically, and then say we engage people. But this was truly the voice of everybody who'd engaged in running with their own community. So it might be the Somalian community, the Bangladeshi community, you know, whoever they might be, they wanted to use the space. And so we went to the landowners and we said, okay, we want to actually have the land permanently. So we would like you to give us the lease. And I think this week we're signing it. So that piece of land has now gone out of the private circulation and is going to be a common good for that kind of community. And we got funding, crowdfunded for the permanent building to be built, and the Mayor of London put £50,000 into it. And so you know, I know I'm kind of using the real world systems, but in a way, I think it's kind of interesting with the methodology of how do we also impact the real world. So my interest, as I said, is between these two worlds, how they kind of communicate, because I think retreating to one, leaving the other to these people is not also the solution. So and then this is another project which it's another land grab. So we've done kind of 5 different land grabs in London in the same model. But this one, I just want to talk about that public commons perspective. So this is another piece of land that we took on. Those are not trees, by the way. They were just shrubs with lots of kind of car waste and things like that in that kind of piece of land. We had to constitute as a group so that the local government could take us seriously as a kind of a semi-legal entity. And then we just, again, we always use these events as a way to build value, as a way to also hear people, as a way to also listen, and as a way to also see what everybody wants in a way. Bringing communities together, and then they sign up. And so we had, you know, in terms of, you know, digital platforms, it's not a lot, but we had like 1,000 people, which, you know, at that point, I mean, this is 2007. It was kind of quite a lot of people to mobilize. Then we kind of had 250,000 to clear the site and build this kind of community food growing. Now, what we managed to do was to designate, to get the land designated as a public park. And before, it would have also, you know, they could just put containers on it and rent it out, and it wouldn't be for public good. But it got designated as a public park, so it has to be open the whole time. But then the community got food growing is a commons because it has a set community. You can join it. There is membership kind of processes to join it. But then there was this complete kind of conflict and clash because people thought it's a park and they can just take the food. And so there is, you know, they didn't know how, because it just was like, yeah, but it's a park, it's public. And then the community were like, yeah, but it's not, because we're, you know, there was a method where we would all garden together on specific days, harvest everything and cook. And then, you know, people could join, but you couldn't just take it for your personal kind of benefit. So it's kind of quite interesting that you see the difference. You know, there's a difference between these two logics. These are just some of the images. Yeah, and then of course, community events, sharing of the produce when there was too much. And then, yeah, winning kind of awards and so on. And then we had to redo it. And it's really interesting because it's been going on, you know, I said it was 2007, so it's been going on for a long time. But at one point, the demographic changed in the area, and we had to, and also, you know, different government. There was not the same amount of funding and so on and so forth. And we had to completely change the business case, or the business case, but, you know, the strategy of how we do things. So then we changed. So half of it became a biodiversity garden. Another half, we started to work with a natural dye company where they're trying to create a textile commons and a fashion commons in London, which is very local in terms of they produce the silk locally, they dye it locally, they create, which I'll talk about in a minute because it was one of my students. But anyway, so there was that, there was a local cafe and plots. So our community became plot holders who had to also look after the rest. So we started to kind of really diversify, if you like, in terms of the different interests and different communities. And all of this kind of led to the course that I designed, which then led to, actually it's a professional course. So people already have organizations or practices. So this is where the Fashion Commons came in, because Alice came in talking about, I don't know if she's still doing it. We're meeting on Monday, so I'll find out. But she talked about an infrastructure that she was kind of creating in terms of a harvest festival, because with the clothing we have today has so many fibers, the only tech, well, there is no tech. The only way we can unpick them is by hand. And she kind of did this quite intensive study that if we stop production of fashion now and fabrics, we basically have enough to sustain for the next 30 years. So, you know, then what do we do with all this if it doesn't go to landfill? Then she started to talk to the botanical dye and kind of connecting different community gardens through growing dye plants. So again, it supports that infrastructure of community gardens that are struggling. And then the idea of a collective mill, because again, centrally by corporations, the mills, in order for the fabric to be affordable, you have to, you have a minimum order of 10,000 meters. So it just benefits the big outfits rather than smaller kind of organizations like hers. So then they came together, fundraised, and well, I don't know, actually, this is something I'm checking, but there was the idea that there would be a cooperative kind of a cooperative mill. So then so that's kind of my, what's the time? Yeah, that's fine. So that was my kind of what I've been involved in, just a couple of the projects. But then I started to, when I started to look at now the digital space, we haven't done any of this. So these are conceptual. But I started to question, because every time in the real world when we were doing these projects, you come to a point and the funding runs out. And then you're left with these communities that you have to leave behind. And you haven't had time to capacity build for them to take over themselves. And that kind of notion of care became more and more horrifying in a way. So I started to think whether the NFTs, because we also as an arts organization had loads of art, digital art, that was in our archives doing nothing. So then we thought, can they become an opportunity to fund our activism? So we have digital posters, reports, photographs, drawings, illustrations, videos, and so on. And this is kind of an example of those drawing that we have digitally, which is a banner where at the Venice Architecture Biennale, we proposed this idea of a Ministry of Common Land, and what would that look like if we had that. Yeah, these are just other images which are that's Eleanor Ostrom on the right. So these were masks that were done by a local school children, and we did an educational program. The other one on the other side is Jane Jacobs. So we did an educational program around people who had fought for the common good in a way, and they kind of made these masks. And these are kind of other drawings that we invented, called as kind of commons based, where all the different kind of community wealth that's generated by the community, but the developers come in and say, oh, there's nothing here. There's no, this place doesn't have identity, so we can build whatever we want. These kind of images became a way for us to demonstrate the wealth of knowledge, expertise, activities, and so on, and give it value. Yeah, and performances, like, yeah, these kinds of images. So these are just some of the stuff that was sitting there. And so then we started to say, okay, if we manage to do that, which is kind of we're still looking at, then where would the funds go? So of course it would go to the artists. The other interesting thing was that when we co-produce with community groups artworks, then we're the only ones who are actually benefiting, because I've made a kind of conscious decision to pay people who are co-producing art with us. So it's always built into our budgets. But after that, the ongoing is us showing this stuff and actually getting the cultural capital. But what if the NFTs would allow them to continuously earn also through us selling the NFTs, so that it can go to different wallets of people who've been involved? So, and would that also mean that the IP of that work, the intellectual property of that work, is decentralized? And that's something, so both in terms of the wealth can be much more equalized and it's not centralized by us, but also the intellectual property, because they've been involved in the production of it. So that I find really, really fascinating, and I really would like us to do that. We have never, anytime you'll see with our website, it's from the 90s still, we never have time, we're always doing stuff, so we never have time to do marketing or admin around kind of this work. So potentially even something, because it's always, the money always goes into activism that we're doing that we don't have funds for, because who funds that stuff? We also have a new initiative called the School for Civic Action, which is really supporting people who wouldn't usually have access to higher education or the funds to kind of have that access if they need it. But anyway, that's a different talk and a different project. So together with all of this kind of stuff that I was talking about around the different movement of the commons, my alumni, or the alumni of the course who are doing all these commons projects, for which we're looking at a cultural commons guild now. And so we thought, okay, let's maybe create that it's not just our NFTs. Reclaim the Commons DAO would be a bigger platform that is not just about our NFTs, but broaden it up to much broader kind of community who kind of want to develop this, this kind of way of working and this kind of distribution of wealth. Collaborate with DAOs which are engaged in the commons to build the NFT platform. ReFi, again, I'm starting to look into that, this distributed IP. The democratic decision making, and then what it generates, maybe a percentage of it goes obviously into a collective pot that the DAO then decides what other activist work we need to kind of do towards this. But it also starts to create an artistic movement, which isn't just about, you know, selling ape kind of things for personal wealth. Not that I'm against kind of personal wealth, but I just think that, you know, if we're talking about the commons, it's maybe it's really interesting to also think about it as an artistic movement. So that's just some of the initial work around mapping what. Sorry, these are really small. I can share them so you can. And it's not actually my work. It was done by one of my students, who is now one of the directors at Public Works, Rhiannon. So she looked at how the guilds operated traditionally in a very centralized way, and how you could decentralize them as a network kind of system, and where the kind of values, how the values start to shift when you start to do that. So when I talk about the Cultural Commons DAO, which will be one of the sub-DAOs of Reclaim the Commons, then that's kind of some of the research and the work we're engaging with right now. And then finally, this is another angle. So these are my two, I suppose, loves. One is art and social justice, and the other one is energy and the planet. And the Energy Trust DAO, so you see that Rurban at the bottom, that's where our base is in the UK, in London. It's a space, and when you go on there, if you go on there, the website sends you to our French partners rather than ours. So I've told the team to correct that. But Rurban it was a kind of abandoned site again, like all our other kind of projects, where we started to work with lots of different partners and communities to create kind of regenerative energy experiments, such as kind of biogas from food waste, to running a local cafe, to classrooms, to making spaces, to food growing. And also there are garages, small garages on the side, which are different studios, and we're in kind of a couple of them. And it's already kind of setting up this community. So Poplar Harker, which is the company, the organization you can see, is a public-private housing association that offers both private housing and social housing. And so I've been talking to them and an organization called, a startup blockchain company called Greenium, to look at whether Poplar Harker, I think they have around 10,000 homes that they own and manage, whether they can become energy producers rather than energy consumers. So we start to kind of then look at that level in terms of peer-to-peer energy use, and also whether there could be systems built in so that the actually less advantaged, more disadvantaged households, which are in energy crisis mode at the moment, they don't even have, some of them, money to cook their food or warm their food, that could become stabilized if a trust such as an energy trust by Popular Haka, who has to benefit their own community and their own residents, could start to kind of create this balance and do what is right energy-wise for their community, and it's also renewable. So again, getting rid of the big guys who are accumulating profit. I mean, it's a research fund that we will be working on. So everything's kind of in production, I suppose, from the digital perspective. And I think that's it. I hope that's giving us enough time to, I haven't been seeing the chat, so maybe I stopped sharing, but, oh, it's all gone black. Oh, a lot in the chat. Do you guys wanna just talk about those things? Because
I would like to pose a question.
Yes.
I very much appreciate your methodology that I subscribe to from the bottom up, etc. The observation, the factor of working with people. Personally, I'm into similar type of space, doing projects for arts in remote areas, and having had a lot of experience in European projects, land in which we were trying to use the support of the European technology projects to do some research into this type of space. So from this, my question, this kind of activities, sometimes we bring them in places that are really, really necessary. Like in my case, I have one of the last was a very remote village up on the mountains in Liguria. Mm-hmm. And what I realized that we were unwilling a vector of gentrification, enormous vector of a gentrification in a speculative sense by the people themselves, sometimes of the village. So they were very happy not to give us any support, but to use everything we tried to bring there to somehow speculate on their own culture. My question is, I'm very keen in discussing and finding out what are the strategies to avoid or mitigate this effect in attempts that are sometimes often very, not paid. We were not doing it paid and instead risk to, in start processes that are not the one you really want to have.
Can I clarify, was that triggered by the local people, the gentrification, or by those from outside?
We did produce a research about it because it was very interesting. There was a little part was outsiders that were watching what was happening there on Facebook and coming in with speculative intent and bringing, all kind of initiatives, let's say in parallel. Then there was a big push by the local mayor, a mayor of a city of 150, that wanted to get public funding to put cement and restore places. Yeah. And this bringing big fundings in a zone in which there is a big risk of hydrogeological risk means bringing big money from the state. So then they moved in also politicians from the bigger city, let's say, of the same political party, with the intention of profiting from it. So I found really myself, and this is just one of the many cases, but I found really myself in being a vector for the worst type of gentrification you can imagine. And we had to move out of the place.
Yeah, it's a really hard one. Has there anyone else who's had this? Maybe it's good if it's also... Yeah, I mean, it is a really hard problem. And I don't have obviously I don't have a solution for it. But yeah, it's a really good point. It's a really good point to be aware of. And one thing I have found useful, and it might be really useful, and I can share an article on this, is I can't share an article on I can share an article on this relational power, because it's a really I think it's a power thing again, you know, and I started to do power mappings in certain situations and actually confront people with the power maps. And so, you know, where does the power lie? And how does it move through time as I'm engaging in projects? And being very honest about where my power is as well. You know, we can't kind of not think about ours. And sometimes it's been useful, sometimes it's been really conflicting, because people don't want to even talk about it, yeah, because then you're outing them, yeah. In local authorities, when I've been involved in things like this, I've said it really gently, in an English way, you know, like, so I've said things like, I'm sorry, I didn't know you're gentrifying this high street, and then they were like, no, we're not. So then you kind of go, okay, but I mean, if you do this, and if you do this, and if you do this, and if you do this, then it is going to gentrify it, and so it's maybe sometimes just all we can do, and then share the knowledge between us, is to see what we test. And I also kind of, I'm also in a village somewhere else in Europe, where again the same thing has happened, and it is gentrifying fast, but the people, local people, really don't like it because they don't feel they are included.
Yeah.
So actually, again, the design of the process could have been really different, but they are happy that the land prices of their houses has gone up so they can sell it and retire. You know. So,
yeah. Just a note. I live in Amsterdam, in which gentrification, you know, is done with specific by architects that really make the fake community coffee center, and they gentrify in 2 years, right? Yeah. So I also see the problem from both sides.
Yeah.
And this is one of the reasons that keeps me in the space of DAOs, is the radical transparency clause that is embedded into the use of the technology. Yeah. That it's one of my ideas on one of the conditions to move inside a process. But yeah, I'm still very far from having a solution. So that's why I ask all the time. Thank you for your answers.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
I see lots of comments. Maybe just jump in, because I'm worried. Somebody asks what happened to the high street. It was a nightmare. I'll be very honest with you. I mean, I think it's, and I tell you the different bits what was a nightmare, because it was an interesting learning. So the one, it's the local government. The local government in this situation, I think, not in the oblivion of wanting to accumulate power and keep it, don't understand that the commons or the sphere of community can be their collaborators. There's a really interesting article by the activist magazine called Stir to Action, called A Public Commons Partnership. It's just come out, maybe look it up. And I think a lot of us are advocating for that, so that they realize that them accumulating power is not going to support them in the long run. So one was that we had really tricky, so there was a market, and the market traders and the people who from the council, from the local authority that managed the council, just did not want to have change. So it was really difficult to influence it. Then we took over a car park opposite the little room I showed you. And that community group, you know, they went through hell and ran markets. So they wouldn't allow them to have food at the market. It was really niche what they would allow. So of course it failed, right? So there's all these kind of tactics. And then they had a town planning plan center, but then which was initiated by the government, but then the government changed, that initiative changed. Like, honestly, so it was so ridiculous that, but the interesting thing is, so in terms of the high street, they didn't manage so much, but this space, all the different community initiatives that sprang out of it, a local journalism, community journalism platform sprung out of it, a neighborhood plan sprang out of it. And a neighborhood plan is actually very interesting because it's very commons-based, and it's a legal thing from the Localism Act, you know, David Cameron's Big Society, which communities, it's a long process, but communities can create their own neighborhood plan, which if a developer goes to develop something in a neighborhood, they have to also legally refer to the policies that's been made by the people. I mean, I can talk about that at a different time if there's interest, but so it wasn't that they did that, they managed with the high street, but there's a lot that sprang out of it, which was very empowering, and that wouldn't have happened. And then actually a network of community gardens as well, locally, called the, I can't remember what that, I can't remember. There was a whole network of them. So that, but please jump in because I might not see, and I've seen Chad, I've got your email, thank you. If that's for me or for everyone, I suppose, who's interested in the group. I'm
a little curious as far as you moved from being a technophobe more into this space of blockchain and utilizing this technology. The people that maybe are like more technophobish, like how are they responding to the concept of raising money with NFTs and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, even my own organization, it's really hard. And I just, at the end, I just said, okay, fine, the core group doesn't, you just have to keep going. So I have now, there's 2 of us who are really keen and excited about it. There's another founding member who was really, like, he was a real technology person, and he kind of, I think it's the environmental thing especially with Bitcoin but then I organized a DAO talk, and now he's super excited and is going to invite the person who's Nick, who's doing the Factory DAO, to come at the university level for us to start to do some experiments from the ground up, how the students can manage a kind of fund he has as a course leader of a course through a DAO. So I think we're kind of trying from the ground up. And for me, it was, I had hit a wall, basically, that I thought, we can't go any further. I've done all the experiments in the real world that I potentially can do. And how does this scale up? How do we create a different global community? I loved the disruption. I mean, I generally love disruption. So I'm an Iranian, as you've seen on TV or in the media, what's happening, it's in our blood. So I think generally that's the thing that hooked me. I think the disruption, the anarchy of it, and DeFi actually, in a weird way, I thought this is it, for me to spend a big chunk of my time.
That's amazing. Just one small follow-up. Do you think it's more misunderstanding of the technology or fear or the environmental factors versus just the sort of the political or the cultural backlash that crypto in general is facing right now?
I mean, to be honest, the current backlash really set us back a little bit. especially talking to institutions, you know, like housing associations. I mean, I don't talk to banks, but I think you know, I'm also going to propose a teaching program specifically around the commons and the metaverse and DAOs. And I'm teaching one currently at University of Arts London called Spatializing Technology, which is just experimentation, but you know, really, really exciting things come out of that from the students, which I think maybe I will introduce to Max and the team, that they can come and talk about it, because, you know, like a completely virtual museum, for example, by one student that is, so that is then creating the new memorials or the new types of what goes into a museum from the ground up, which I think is incredible. So there's some really incredible projects that, and then I think once people start to see that in that kind of more left sphere, they then start to see the potential. And I think that's really great. And the other thing is that we haven't done enough studies, I think, around the energy side of it. So if, you know, so I always ask the question, you know, if we build less buildings and all the energy that the construction industry takes, and all the resources of deforestation, because you need aluminium and crap like that, then, you know, how is that comparable to proof of stake, you know? You know, and that hasn't been done in order for us to kind of say, well, look at it as an industry. Don't look at it as, you know, it's the energy of a small country. I mean, what does that mean? You know, look at it, it's global. So you can't, it's like apples and pears, you know, you can't talk about a country with something that's global. Look at a global industry and its impact, and then kind of say, how is that and I don't want to defend it, I just don't know, you know. So, but I just think that the comparisons are completely wrong at the moment. And I think it is that narrative. I think there's the centralized institutional narrative being put out there, and then simplistic understanding just repeats it, right? And then it becomes reality. So
thank you. Thanks.
Yeah, and that email, Chad, is for everyone. So please do copy it if you're interested. Anything else? Yeah, I can't see hands, so please.
If you forgive me for talking twice in this talk, I have experimented a lot with the game, sort of set up a situation in which you can introduce people to concepts that are from the donut economy, from permaculture, and also from the DAO world and crypto. Check it out. It might be of interest, because after all, we have learned capitalism from monopoly. So maybe we can work the next thing from another game.
Yeah,
that has the things that we are interested in.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't talk about that as well, because that's another, like one of my students said, do you ever sleep? But I'm just excited about this stuff. But there was another collaboration with Spheroid Universe, which is a metaverse. Actually, one of the founders is in Holland, in Amsterdam, and I really like them because they kind of look at the relationship between the real world and the digital world. And they've mapped, you know, a bit like Earth 2, but I think they're better in their development than Earth 2. And so we ran a short summer school together in London around the metaverse and the commons. And one of the projects was through gaming, you know, if the idea is to swim in the River Thames in 10 years' time, you know, how can we do that through a kind of game? And you know, with play to earn and or whatever, you know, what are the different kind of aspects that could be done to maybe cross-subsidize organizations in some way. I mean, you know, you have to have a lot of traffic in order to obviously sustain something like that. But anyway, conceptually, so that could be done much faster from the ground up, you know, the regeneration of our waters or the river. So that's another one that we are also kind of playing with. So gaming, I think, is really interesting. Yeah. So I think it's probably time anyway, no? Thank you so much, everyone, for your time. And yeah, I hope to see more of you.
Thank you so much, Torange. A great conversation, a great presentation. And yeah, let's see each other on other sessions. Have a great time of the day whenever you are. Cheers.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Bye,
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.